This is a higher level question on disease. It requires quite a bit of thinking about a similar example that you have been shown and applying it to one which has got different components. Do pause the video and have a go at the questions. Here is part A. And here is part B and C. Once you have had a go, press play and I'll explain how you should be looking at this question. Question 6. Lungworm is an infection. Lungworm can kill dogs. All of this is information that we are going to need. We haven't learnt about lungworm, so we need to pay particular attention to what is going on in this diagram and this information in order to understand what we're going to be asked. It is caused by a small worm. The diagram below shows the life cycle of the lungworm. So, number 1, the lungworm reproduces in the dog and infects the lungs. That will make the dog ill. The larvae, which are the young stages of the worm, are coughed up from the lungs and swallowed. So it's going to make the dog ill in the lungs, but if they are swallowed, then it can go through the dog and out the other end. Number 2, the worm larvae pass out in the feces of the dog and are picked up by snails. The dog will go to the loo, and if it's not picked up by its owner, it can be encountered by the snails, and therefore the snails are picking up the young lungworm from the dog. The snail now has the larvae in it, so if the dogs touch or eat the snails, they do tend to sniff anything. The larvae can then pass back to the dog. Now it's important to understand that we're not talking about the same dog here. This dog would give out some worm larvae which would be picked up by this snail, and another dog would find the snail, and that would mean that more of the population would have the lungworm. Now we've had a think about it, let's see what our questions are. Question A, what type of organism is represented by the snail in the life cycle of the lungworm? Fungus. Well, fungi are mushrooms, so don't think it can be that one. Parasite. Does the snail actually live on the dog? That's what a parasite is, that's what a parasite does. In this case, no, so it can't be a parasite. A protist. Now, a protist or protoctist is a type of organism that is normally single-celled. So no, not a protist. A vector. What is a vector? Well, a vector is something that transfers a pathogen from one place to another. So effectively, our snail is getting the lungworm from one place and it is transferring it to the dog. So yes, vector will be our answer. Question B, suggest how the spread of the lungworm disease can be prevented. Suggest question, not in your revision guide, not something your teacher has told you, something you are supposed to work out knowing the cycle that they have given you. And this cycle is pretty similar to a disease that you have looked at, malaria, and having a think about what you can surmise from that diagram. So how can it be prevented? Well, the main part of our problem with the lungworm is the snails. So we could destroy the snails. If we destroyed the snails, we would stop this cycle from going around. We could make sure that infected dogs are isolated. If they're isolated, they can't leave their feces in places that the snails could get. You could also treat infected dogs. If you're treating them, the lungworm will be killed. They won't be able to put the lungworm in their feces, therefore it doesn't go to the snails. Or, as we talked about when we first looked at this diagram, if owners pick up the feces of their dogs, then this stops the whole cycle from getting to the snail in the first place. So, education of owners could also be a way of making sure that lungworm is stopped. So, suggest how the spread of lungworm disease can be prevented. It's 3 marks, so it is, it's 3 marks, so it's wanting 3 different factors. So let's go with our first 3. Destroy the snails, isolate infected dogs, and we'll go for the last one, educate owners about picking up dog feces. Make sure you spell feces correctly. Last of all, it goes back to the disease that you have learnt about, that is on your curriculum, malaria. Malaria is a disease spread by mosquitoes. They are the vector in this case. Describe one way to control the spread of malaria. There are several, and the mark scheme for this particular question really narrowed it down quite a lot. One of the best ways to control the spread of malaria is to not allow the mosquito to bite the human. So, use of mosquito nets would be a sufficient answer. It's only asking us for 1. We don't need to put 2. If we were looking at 2, we'd probably go back and we would go, well, we could also destroy the mosquitoes in the same way that we've destroyed the snails, and that would also be a perfectly acceptable answer. I'm going to put the mark scheme underneath the visualizer so you can have a look. Please do pause it and make sure that you know whether your answers were right or wrong. Thank you for listening.